The woman who destroyed his career had no idea she was about to become the first customer in the little bakery that gave him a reason to live again. The brass bell above the old wooden door rang softly as a cool October breeze drifted inside, carrying the scent of fallen leaves through the tiny bakery on the corner of Maple and 3rd. Marcus Brooks looked up from the tray of cinnamon rolls he had just pulled from the oven, wisps of steam curling into the warm amber light that spilled across the worn hardwood floor. Flour dusted the front of his navy apron, and a thin streak of powdered sugar rested unnoticed along his forearm. Behind him, his 8-year-old daughter, Ava, carefully arranged blueberry muffins inside a glass display case that had probably been older than both of them combined. She stood on a small wooden stool because she was still too short to reach the top shelf, humming quietly as she worked. Marcus smiled at her without saying a word. Moments like this reminded him why every sleepless night had been worth it. 6 months earlier, this place had been abandoned. Broken windows, peeling paint, a leaking roof that dripped whenever it rained more than half an inch. Everyone told him buying it was a mistake. His former co-workers laughed when they heard the story. Some even said a man with no savings, no corporate career, and a child to raise alone should never gamble everything on an old bakery. But they hadn't seen what Marcus saw. He hadn't bought a building. He had bought hope. Every paycheck from temporary construction jobs, every weekend repairing fences, every dollar he could save had gone into restoring the forgotten little shop with his own hands. He sanded the tables after Ava finished her homework. He painted the walls while she colored pictures on overturned flour buckets. Together they baked dozens of failed recipes before finding one that made neighbors smile after the very first bite. It wasn't just bread they were making. It was a future no one else had believed they deserved. The morning crowd had finally slowed when Marcus wiped the marble countertop with a clean towel and glanced through the large front window. Across the street, sunlight reflected sharply off the polished hood of a black luxury sedan as it eased to the curb. Expensive, quiet, perfectly clean. It looked completely out of place beside the family-owned shops lining the block. The driver's door never opened. Instead, the rear passenger door swung outward, and a woman stepped onto the sidewalk wearing a tailored ivory coat that moved gently in the autumn breeze. Her heels clicked steadily against the brick pavement as she approached the bakery. Marcus froze. His breathing slowed almost imperceptibly. There were faces you forgot within weeks. Others disappeared after months. But some remained carved into memory forever because they represented the exact moment your life changed. Claire Whitmore hadn't changed much in 3 years. Her posture was still confident. Her silver watch still caught the morning light. Even from across the room, she carried the quiet authority of someone accustomed to making decisions worth millions of dollars before breakfast. She reached for the brass handle without hesitation, unaware that the man waiting inside had once spent 12 years building his career at her company before losing everything with one signature. The bell chimed again as the door opened. Warm air wrapped around her while the aroma of fresh butter, cinnamon, and vanilla replaced the cold October wind outside. Claire looked toward the counter with polite curiosity, expecting another neighborhood baker. Instead, her eyes met Marcus Brooks. Time seemed to pause. Recognition flashed across her face almost instantly. Marcus recognized it too. Yet instead of anger, accusation, or even surprise, he offered the same gentle smile he gave every customer who walked through that door. His voice remained calm, steady, and welcoming. "Good morning. What can I get for you today?" Claire didn't answer right away, because in that single ordinary sentence, she realized something impossible. The man whose future she believed had ended 3 years ago had somehow built a new beginning without asking anyone for permission. Claire remained motionless for several long seconds, her hand still resting lightly on the brass door handle as though she had forgotten why she had come inside. The cheerful sounds of the bakery continued around her. A coffee grinder hummed softly behind the counter. A timer chimed from the kitchen. Outside, children laughed as they hurried toward the nearby elementary school. Life had kept moving, yet somehow this room felt suspended between 2 different chapters of the same story. Marcus gently placed a fresh loaf of sourdough onto the cooling rack before meeting her eyes again. There was no resentment in his expression, only the quiet confidence of a man who had survived enough disappointments to stop carrying them everywhere he went. Ava noticed the silence and looked curiously from her father to the elegant stranger. She offered Claire a bright smile that only children could give without hesitation. "Good morning, ma'am. We have fresh apple turnovers today. They are my favorite." Claire looked down at the little girl and returned a small smile almost automatically. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice carrying less certainty than usual. "They smell wonderful." Marcus placed an apple turnover into a small paper bag with practiced care. "She is right," he said. "The apples came from a farm about 20 miles outside the city. They arrived before sunrise." Claire watched every movement. 3 years earlier, she had only known Marcus Brooks as employee number 4176, a senior operations engineer whose reports were always precise, whose meetings were always brief, and whose name rarely appeared unless something needed fixing. She had never imagined those same careful hands kneading dough before dawn or wrapping pastries with the same attention he once gave production schedules. "You own this place?" she finally asked. Marcus nodded. "Ava and I do." Ava proudly added, "Daddy says every loaf has to earn somebody's smile before it earns $1. Marcus laughed quietly. "I might have said something like that." Claire looked around the bakery more carefully. The shelves were handmade from reclaimed oak. Family photographs decorated one wall instead of expensive artwork. A chalkboard listed the day's specials in colorful handwriting that was obviously Ava's. Near the register sat a small basket labeled, "Take a loaf if you need one. Pay when you can. If you cannot, God bless you anyway." Claire stared at the basket for a moment. "Do people actually use this?" Marcus followed her gaze. "Sometimes. Does that not hurt business?" Marcus folded a clean kitchen towel before answering. "Maybe on paper. But every family deserves fresh bread once in a while. Some come back later and pay. Some never can. Either way, Ava learned something more valuable than profit." Claire lowered her eyes, unexpectedly unsettled by the answer. During the past 5 years, she had negotiated billion-dollar acquisitions, closed struggling factories, and delivered speeches about efficiency, growth, and shareholder confidence. Yet standing inside a bakery no larger than 1,200 square feet, she realized she had not heard anyone speak about success quite like this in a very long time. Before she could respond, the front door opened again. An elderly mail carrier stepped inside carrying a stack of envelopes. "Morning, Marcus," he called warmly. "Your coffee already waiting?" Marcus asked. The man grinned. "Just the way you always know I like it." Ava hurried to prepare the cup, while Marcus accepted the mail with a thankful nod. Claire noticed how naturally everyone greeted him by name. Customers entered smiling. Neighbors waved through the window. It was the kind of respect no executive title could demand. As the mail carrier left, one envelope slipped from the stack and landed on the counter. Marcus picked it up casually, but the return address made his expression pause for the briefest moment. It bore the unmistakable logo of Whitmore Development Group, the very company Claire now led, and neither of them knew that whatever was written inside would soon test everything they believed about second chances. Marcus turned the envelope over once before placing it beside the register unopened. He had spent too many years letting unexpected letters determine the direction of his life, and he had promised himself that no piece of paper would ever steal another peaceful morning with his daughter. Ava slid the warm cup of coffee toward the elderly mail carrier, who dropped a few dollar bills into the tip jar before waving goodbye through the front window. The bakery settled into its familiar rhythm again, filled with quiet conversations, the soft scrape of chairs across the wooden floor, and the comforting aroma of butter melting into fresh bread. Claire found herself watching Marcus more than the customers. He remembered every regular's name. He knew who preferred whole wheat instead of sourdough, who needed decaffeinated coffee after heart surgery, and which child always received an extra chocolate chip cookie on Friday mornings because it marked the end of another week of chemotherapy. None of those gestures appeared calculated. They came as naturally as breathing. She could not remember the last time she had walked into a business where kindness seemed to be part of the operating system instead of a marketing strategy. Marcus finally noticed her eyes drifting toward the unopened envelope. "Some news can wait until the bread cools," he said with a quiet smile. Claire almost laughed at the unexpected wisdom hidden inside such an ordinary sentence. "I wish I had learned that years ago," she admitted. Marcus did not ask what she meant. Instead, he carefully arranged another tray inside the display case, while sunlight poured through the front windows, painting long golden reflections across the polished countertop. Ava stepped beside her father and tugged gently on his sleeve. "Daddy, can I bring Mrs. Henderson her blueberry muffins after school?" Marcus nodded immediately. "Of course. She has been looking forward to Fridays." Claire listened carefully. "Mrs. Henderson?" Ava smiled. "She is 90 years old and cannot walk very far anymore. Daddy says neighbors should never have to miss fresh bread just because life gets harder." Claire felt something tighten quietly inside her chest. For years, she had measured success through quarterly reports, expansion charts, and stock performance. Yet this tiny bakery, tucked between a florist and a hardware store, seemed to produce something far more valuable than profit. It produced trust. Her thoughts drifted backward despite herself. She remembered the board meeting 3 years earlier when Marcus's personnel file had landed in front of her. Budget reductions, department restructuring, performance concerns. The recommendations had already been prepared before she entered the room. She had reviewed dozens of similar files that week, believing every conclusion presented by senior management. She remembered signing the final page without ever meeting the employee whose future depended upon her decision. At the time, it had seemed responsible, necessary, efficient. Standing here now, she realized efficiency often arrived wearing the disguise of incomplete truth. Her attention returned as Marcus finally picked up the envelope. He slid one finger beneath the seal and unfolded the letter slowly. His eyes moved across the page only once before his expression became unusually still. Not frightened, not angry, simply thoughtful. Ava looked up immediately. "Is everything all right, Daddy?" Marcus forced a reassuring smile before folding the paper neatly. "We are going to be all right," he answered gently, though his voice carried a weight Claire had not heard before. She watched him place the letter flat on the counter, and this time she could clearly read the first line beneath the company logo. It was an official notice announcing that Whitmore Development Group intended to acquire every property on the block, including the bakery that Marcus and Ava had sacrificed everything to build, and the final approval meeting was scheduled for Monday morning, with Claire Whitmore listed as the executive responsible for signing the agreement. Claire felt the warmth of the bakery disappear beneath the weight of the letter lying on the counter. She did not need to read another line to recognize the project number or the acquisition plan. She had approved the proposal for preliminary review 6 weeks earlier after consultants described the neighborhood as an underperforming commercial district ready for redevelopment. On paper, it had been a simple investment. Replace aging buildings with luxury apartments, premium retail space, and underground parking. The presentation had included colorful charts, projected revenue, and glowing market forecasts. Not one slide had shown an 8-year-old girl proudly arranging blueberry muffins before school. Not one report had mentioned the elderly neighbors who gathered here every morning because this bakery felt more like family than business. Marcus quietly folded the letter again and placed it back inside the envelope. He refused to let disappointment steal the peace of the room. A young mother entered carrying a toddler on her hip, and Marcus greeted her with the same warm smile as though nothing had changed. "The banana bread is still warm," he said. "I saved the corner piece your son likes." The little boy clapped happily while his mother thanked him. Claire watched the exchange in silence. She had visited hundreds of businesses throughout her career, but she had rarely seen a place where people walked in looking tired and left smiling. Ava stepped beside her father again, carefully brushing flour from her sweater. "Daddy, are we going to lose the bakery?" she asked quietly, making sure the customers could not hear. Marcus knelt until he was eye level with her. "We are not going to lose who we are," he answered softly. "Buildings matter, sweetheart, but people matter more. No matter what happens, we stay together." Ava nodded, accepting the answer with the trust only a child could give. Claire lowered her eyes, suddenly unable to meet either of them. She thought about the countless presentations where executives discussed relocation as though lives could simply be transferred from one address to another. Numbers moved easily across spreadsheets. Families did not. Marcus stood again and finally looked directly at Claire. There was no accusation in his voice. "I suppose you already know about the project." She hesitated before answering honestly. "Yes, I knew about the redevelopment. I did not know about this bakery." Marcus gave a small nod. "That usually happens. People see property lines before they see people." His words landed gently, yet they carried more weight than any criticism she had received in a boardroom. Outside, Construction surveyors walked along the sidewalk, placing bright orange markers near the curb while taking measurements. The sight made several customers glance nervously through the windows. One elderly man sighed quietly and whispered to his wife, "I hope they do not take this place too." Claire followed their gaze and realized the project was no longer an abstract plan waiting inside conference rooms. It had already arrived. She reached into her handbag and removed the leather notebook she carried to every executive meeting. For a long moment, she stared at the blank page before writing a single sentence in careful handwriting. Visit every business before signing anything. It was the first note she had added to her schedule that had nothing to do with profit margins or investor expectations. Marcus noticed, but said nothing. He simply handed her the paper bag containing the apple turnover that had grown cold during their conversation. "On the house," he said. Claire shook her head gently and placed a $20 bill beside the register. Marcus returned $10 immediately. "You only bought one pastry." Claire looked at him with quiet disbelief. Most people would have kept the change today. Marcus smiled with the same calm dignity she remembered seeing years ago in old employee photographs. Doing the right thing should never depend on how difficult the day becomes. Claire carried the pastry to the door, but before stepping outside, she looked back one final time at Marcus and Ava standing together beneath the warm morning light. And for the first time since becoming chief executive officer, she wondered whether the biggest mistake of her career had not been a business decision, but failing to learn the story behind the name before she signed the paper. Monday morning arrived beneath a gray autumn sky, and the neighborhood woke to the unfamiliar sound of survey equipment clicking against the sidewalk instead of the cheerful conversations that usually floated through the bakery windows. Marcus unlocked the front door before sunrise as he always did, refusing to let uncertainty interrupt the routine that had become the foundation of his daughter's world. The first batch of sourdough rested beneath linen cloths, slowly rising beside the warmth of the ovens, while Ava carefully wrote the day's special on the chalkboard with colorful chalk. She drew a tiny smiling loaf of bread beside the price, making Marcus laugh despite everything waiting beyond those walls. "Do you think people will still come today?" she asked quietly. Marcus looked through the front window as several construction trucks rolled slowly past the block. "People always need breakfast," he replied. "And sometimes they need hope even more." By 8 o'clock, the bakery had filled with familiar faces. Mrs. Henderson sat near the front window with her usual blueberry muffin. The mail carrier stopped for coffee before beginning his route. 2 firefighters picked up cinnamon rolls for their station. None of them talked much about the redevelopment, yet everyone glanced occasionally toward the orange survey markers outside, as though pretending not to notice them would somehow make them disappear. Shortly before noon, Marcus placed a handwritten sign near the register that read, "Thank you for believing in small businesses and big hearts." Customers paused to read it before quietly adding generous tips into the glass jar beside the register. One elderly veteran folded a $20 bill into Marcus's hand and whispered, "This bakery reminds us that neighborhoods are built by people, not blueprints." Marcus thanked him, but slipped the money into the community bread basket instead. "Someone else probably needs it more today," he said gently. Across town, Claire sat inside the executive conference room surrounded by polished glass walls and digital presentations projecting colorful architectural renderings across a massive screen. The redevelopment team enthusiastically described rooftop gardens, luxury retail space, and projected annual revenue that exceeded every investor's expectations. The lead consultant pointed confidently at the map displayed behind him. "The acquisition process is nearly complete," he announced. "Every property owner has either accepted preliminary offers or will be subject to standard acquisition procedures. The remaining bakery occupies less than 1% of the development footprint." Claire stared at the image. On the enormous screen, Marcus's bakery appeared as nothing more than a tiny rectangle outlined in red. There was no sign of the handmade shelves, no photograph of Ava arranging pastries before school, no mention of neighbors gathering every morning around warm coffee and fresh bread. It was simply Parcel 18B. The consultant smiled confidently. "Once this final signature is completed, demolition planning can begin immediately." He slid a leather folder across the table until it stopped directly in front of Claire. The room became unusually quiet. 12 executives waited politely while sunlight reflected across the polished surface of the conference table. Claire rested her hand on the folder but did not open it. Instead, she remembered Marcus returning $10 because it was the honest thing to do. She remembered his daughter smiling proudly beside the display case. She remembered the basket offering free bread to anyone who needed it. None of those memories belonged inside a financial report, yet suddenly they seemed more important than every spreadsheet stacked before her. "Before I sign anything," Claire said calmly, breaking the silence, "I want every personnel record connected to Marcus Brooks from 3 years ago delivered to my office before the end of today." Several executives exchanged puzzled glances. The consultant frowned politely. "May I ask why that is relevant to this project?" Claire closed the folder without touching the signature page. "Because I have learned that incomplete information has already cost one man his career," she answered. "I am not interested in letting it cost him his future as well." The request for Marcus Brooks's personnel records quietly unsettled the executive floor. Filing cabinets that had not been opened in years were unlocked. Archived emails were recovered from secure servers. Human resources managers who barely remembered the restructuring suddenly found themselves answering questions they had never expected to hear again. Claire sat alone inside her office overlooking the city skyline as late afternoon sunlight stretched across the polished hardwood floor. Her untouched cup of coffee had long since gone cold, but she hardly noticed. One document after another appeared on her desk, each page revealing a little more of a story she had never been told. Marcus had consistently received outstanding performance evaluations. He had reduced production delays by nearly 15% during his final year. He had designed a safety improvement that saved the company hundreds of thousands of dollars annually. Every review praised his integrity, leadership, and calm under pressure. Then everything changed inside the final performance report. The language suddenly became unusually harsh. Leadership concerns, poor collaboration, declining productivity. Claire frowned. The tone was completely different from every previous evaluation. She compared signatures, dates, and departmental notes before reaching for another folder. Something did not fit. She pressed the intercom. "Please send Daniel Foster from Human Resources to my office." 15 minutes later, the senior manager entered carrying additional files. His confident smile faded the moment Claire spread the reports across the conference table. "I need you to explain these discrepancies," she said calmly. Daniel adjusted his glasses and glanced over the paperwork. "That restructuring happened several years ago. I would have to review the details." Claire slid another document toward him. "I already have." The room became very quiet. She pointed to 2 reports completed less than 30 days apart. One praised Marcus as one of the department's strongest engineers. The other recommended immediate termination for poor performance. "People do not transform from exceptional to ineffective in 4 weeks without a significant reason," Claire said. "Where is the documentation supporting that conclusion?" Daniel hesitated before answering. The recommendation came from his direct supervisor. Claire opened another folder. "Interesting. Because the supervisor's original draft says exactly the opposite." Daniel looked up sharply. Claire continued. "The metadata shows the file was edited after his electronic signature was attached. The revisions came from another executive account." She let the silence settle between them. Outside her office window, the city continued moving beneath the fading afternoon light, but inside, every second felt heavier than the last. Daniel slowly lowered his eyes. "There was pressure during the restructuring," he admitted carefully. "The board demanded immediate cost reductions." "Pressure does not change facts," Claire replied quietly. "Who altered the report?" Daniel swallowed before answering. "Richard Collins." Claire immediately recognized the name. Richard had served as vice president of operations before retiring 18 months earlier with public praise for improving corporate efficiency. Daniel continued, speaking more softly. "Marcus discovered design flaws in one of the automated production systems. Correcting them would have delayed a major product launch by several weeks. Richard rejected the recommendation because investors were expecting strong quarterly results. When Marcus refused to approve the project anyway, Richard rewrote the performance review. He presented Marcus as the problem instead of the safety concern." Claire closed her eyes briefly. She remembered the board meeting. She remembered trusting the recommendations placed before her without asking another question. "Did the safety issue turn out to be real?" she asked. Daniel nodded slowly. 3 months after Marcus left, the company quietly spent nearly $8 million correcting the exact problem he warned us about. Claire looked down at the reports scattered across her desk, each page now carrying a different meaning than it had only hours before. Marcus had not lost his career because he failed the company. He had lost it because he had chosen honesty over convenience. She turned toward the wide office window, just as the setting sun painted the skyline in warm shades of gold. And for the first time in years, the city below no longer looked like a collection of opportunities waiting to be acquired. It looked like thousands of lives, each carrying a story that deserved to be understood before anyone dared to sign another piece of paper. The next morning, Claire canceled every meeting on her calendar, an act so unusual that whispers spread across the executive floor before 8 o'clock. Investors waited. Consultants waited. Even members of the board wondered why the redevelopment agreement had not yet been signed. Claire answered none of their questions. Instead, she placed Marcus Brooks's restored personnel file into a leather folder and drove herself across town without a driver, without assistance, and without the polished presentation she normally carried into every important conversation. The bakery was already alive with the familiar sounds of another morning. The soft rhythm of dough meeting the countertop echoed from the kitchen. Fresh coffee filled the air with its rich aroma. Sunlight poured through the front windows, warming the wooden tables where neighbors greeted one another like old friends. Ava stood on her little stool again, carefully arranging chocolate croissants while humming the same quiet tune Claire had heard days earlier. Nothing inside the bakery had changed, yet Claire felt like an entirely different person walking through its door. The brass bell rang softly. Marcus looked up from the espresso machine and offered the same calm smile he gave every guest. "Good morning," he said. "Coffee?" Claire nodded once. "Please." There was no bitterness in his voice, no hint that he knew the sleepless nights she had spent uncovering the truth. He simply prepared the drink with practiced hands, steaming the milk, pouring the espresso, and placing the warm ceramic cup in front of her with quiet care. "You look tired," Marcus observed gently. Claire gave a faint smile. "I finally learned something I should have known 3 years ago." Marcus remained silent, giving her the space to continue if she wished. She slowly opened the leather folder and placed several documents across the counter. Marcus recognized the company logo immediately, but did not reach for the papers. Claire took a steady breath. "You were right." He looked at her with quiet confusion. "About what?" "About people," she answered. "I spent years believing reports before I believed human beings. I trusted conclusions before I looked for truth." Marcus lowered his eyes briefly, but said nothing. Claire unfolded the final report, revealing the original performance evaluation that had praised his leadership and integrity before. It had been secretly altered. "Your record was changed," she said softly. "Your supervisor rewrote the recommendation after it had already been approved. You tried to protect the company. Instead, someone protected a quarterly report." Marcus stared at the page for several long seconds. His expression did not show triumph. It did not show anger. Only a quiet sadness for years that could never be returned. Ava looked between them without fully understanding the conversation. "Daddy?" she asked softly. Marcus smiled reassuringly at his daughter before answering Claire. "I wondered if the truth would ever matter." Claire felt her voice catch. "It matters now." She reached into the folder once more and removed another document. This one carried her own signature across the bottom. "This is an official letter restoring your employment record. Every false evaluation has been removed. Your personnel file now reflects exactly what you earned." Marcus accepted the paper carefully, running his fingers across the page as though confirming it was real. The bakery had grown unusually quiet. Even the regular customers sensed something meaningful unfolding. Mrs. Henderson quietly folded her newspaper. The mail carrier removed his cap. No one interrupted. Claire looked directly at Marcus. Her eyes filled not with authority, but humility. "There is something else I need to say." Marcus met her gaze calmly. "Go ahead." She drew a slow breath. "I cannot change what happened. I cannot give you back the years you lost or the opportunities you deserved. But I can tell you something I should have said the day I learned your name instead of only reading your employee number." Her voice became almost a whisper. "Marcus Brooks, I am deeply sorry. I failed to see the man standing behind the paperwork, and because of that, I made the worst decision of my career." The bakery remained completely silent, broken only by the quiet ticking of the old clock above the doorway. As Marcus looked at the woman who had once changed his life with a signature and now stood before him with nothing left to hide except the hope that forgiveness might still be possible. Marcus lowered the letter onto the counter with extraordinary care, as though it carried not only the truth but the weight of years that neither apology nor paperwork could erase. The bakery remained perfectly still. Even the old espresso machine had finished steaming, leaving only the soft ticking of the wall clock and the gentle rustle of autumn leaves brushing against the front window. Ava slipped her small hand into her father's without saying a word. Marcus squeezed it gently before looking back at Claire. His eyes were calm, not because the pain had never existed, but because time had taught him that carrying bitterness every day only made tomorrow heavier. "Thank you for telling me the truth," he said quietly. Claire nodded, though relief never reached her face. "There is one more decision waiting for me," she admitted. She reached into the folder again and removed the redevelopment agreement. The signature line at the bottom remained blank. "The board expects me to approve this before the end of the day." Marcus looked at the document for a moment before sliding it gently back toward her. "That is your decision." Claire searched his face, almost surprised by the absence of anger. "You are not going to ask me to stop the project?" Marcus smiled softly. "If I have learned anything, it is that doing the right thing only matters when nobody forces you to do it." His answer settled over the room like warm sunlight. Mrs. Henderson quietly removed her glasses to wipe away a tear. The mail carrier smiled faintly into his coffee cup. Claire stared at Marcus, realizing that the man who had lost the most was asking for the least. He wanted no revenge, no public victory, only honesty. Ava gently tugged on Claire's sleeve. "Miss Claire." Claire looked down. "Yes, sweetheart." Ava pointed toward the basket beside the register where fresh loaves still rested beneath a handwritten note inviting anyone in need to take one. "Daddy says when somebody is hungry, you give them bread before you ask why they are hungry." Claire followed the little girl's finger and stood silently for several seconds. Then she looked around the bakery one more time. The photographs covering the walls, the neighbors laughing together over coffee, the worn wooden tables polished by years of conversation instead of luxury. This place was not standing in the way of progress. It was progress, measured in kindness instead of concrete. Without another word, Claire slowly opened the redevelopment agreement. Every customer watched quietly. She lifted her pen. For one long heartbeat, it seemed she was about to sign exactly where the board expected. Instead, she drew a single deliberate line across the signature page. Then another. The ink stretched boldly through the approval section until the document could no longer be executed. She closed the folder and looked directly at Marcus. "Parcel 18B is no longer part of this project." The room remained silent for only a moment before relieved smiles spread from one table to the next. Claire continued, her voice steady but filled with conviction. "This neighborhood deserves investment, not replacement. We will renovate around the businesses that built this community instead of erasing them." Marcus looked at her with quiet gratitude. That cannot have been an easy decision. Claire smiled gently for the first time since walking into the bakery days earlier. "No," she admitted. "It was simply the right one." Marcus extended his hand across the counter. Claire accepted it without hesitation. Their handshake lasted only a few seconds, yet everyone watching understood that something much greater than a business agreement had just been restored. It was trust, earned not through power, but through the courage to admit a mistake and the grace to forgive one. 1 year later, the little bakery on the corner of Maple and 3rd looked much the same from the outside, yet everything inside seemed brighter. Fresh flowers rested beneath the front windows. The old wooden sign had been carefully restored instead of replaced. Children's drawings covered one wall beside framed photographs of neighborhood celebrations held inside the shop. Every morning before sunrise, warm lights spilled onto the sidewalk as the familiar scent of fresh bread drifted through the quiet streets, inviting people to begin another day together. Marcus still unlocked the front door. At 4 o'clock every morning, he still measured flour by hand instead of relying entirely on machines because he believed some things deserved patience. Ava, now a little taller, no longer needed the wooden stool to reach the display shelves. She arranged pastries with growing confidence, greeting customers by name just as her father had taught her. The basket beside the register remained exactly where it had always been, still offering fresh bread to anyone who needed it. The handwritten note had faded slightly with time, but its message remained unchanged. Kindness had never been a temporary promotion. It had become the bakery's foundation. Across town, Whitmore Development Group completed the neighborhood renovation exactly as Claire had promised. Historic storefronts were preserved. Sidewalks were widened. Trees lined the streets. Small businesses received grants instead of eviction notices. Investors questioned the decision at first, but within months the district became one of the most visited areas in the city. People came not because every building looked new, but because every block still felt alive. Reporters often praised the redevelopment as an example of responsible leadership, yet Claire always gave the same answer during interviews. Communities are not built by replacing people. They are strengthened by believing in them. She never mentioned that one small bakery had taught her that lesson better than any business school ever could. One crisp Saturday morning, the brass bell above the bakery door rang once again. Claire stepped inside wearing a simple navy sweater instead of an executive suit. She no longer arrived with assistants or security. She stood in line behind construction workers, teachers, and retirees like everyone else. Marcus looked up from the counter and smiled. "Good morning, Claire." She smiled back, just as naturally. "Good morning, Marcus. Is there any cinnamon bread left?" Ava laughed from behind the display case. "We saved one loaf for you. Daddy said you would probably come today." Claire accepted the warm loaf with both hands, closing her eyes for just a moment as the comforting aroma of butter and cinnamon rose into the cool morning air. "You know," she said softly, "this still tastes better than any breakfast I have ever had in a boardroom." Marcus chuckled quietly. "That is because bread is best when it is shared." They exchanged a knowing smile, one no longer shaped by regret, but by mutual respect. Claire paid for the bread, and Marcus returned the exact change, just as he always had. Some habits deserved to remain untouched. As she reached the door, Claire paused and looked back. Marcus was helping a young father carry a box of pastries to his car, while Ava knelt beside a little boy, showing him how to decorate a cookie with colorful icing. Morning sunlight poured through the front windows, wrapping the bakery in a warm golden glow that no architect could have designed and no amount of money could have purchased. Claire quietly stepped outside without another word, allowing the bell above the door to ring one final gentle note behind her. Inside, laughter mixed with the comforting sound of bread cooling on wooden racks. Outside, autumn leaves drifted slowly across the sidewalk beneath a bright blue sky. And somewhere between the warmth of fresh bread, the quiet strength of forgiveness, and the simple choice to see another human being before seeing a title, the deepest kind of success had finally found its home.